and then Flight Operation Officer. So there are two diploma degree for study program in API Banyuwangi, or we call it flying school in Banyuwangi. Indonesian said the Academy Pilot Indonesia, or Indonesia Civil Pilot Academy in Banyuwangi. So I've been invited by Mr. Aven to join this webinar. I'm very pleased to be a respondent for this session. Maybe there is some certain questions that I will be asked to the expertise tonight. Sorry, I say tonight or this morning, or
Same,
I should say the local time. Yeah.
This morning is okay. This evening is okay.
So thank you for the timing. And then Banyuwangi itself, flying school in Banyuwangi, we have 37 aircraft for the training. There consists of 35 Cessna 172 specific purpose single engine, and 2 Piper Seneca 5 Piper Seneca for multi-engine multi-engine rating training. So in the future, we will, as the order of our boss, API Banyuwangi, or flying school in Banyuwangi, will dealing with seaplane amphibious training for the cadets. That's kind of interesting webinar theme for tonight, for this morning.
Selamat malam Pak Aris Wibowo. Oh, not check. Okay. Yeah.
Selamat malam, Bapak Ibu sekalian.
Selamat malam, Pak Aris.
Mohon maaf ini sebenarnya koneksi saya kurang begitu bagus, agak terputus-putus, Bapak. Mohon izin, Pak Aven.
Gila. Gentlemen from Canada, just speaking is Mr. Aris Wibowo, is from the Director General of Sea Transport. Since it is very interesting agenda, so Director General of Sea Transport represented by Pak Aris Wibowo. And according to the registered participant today, we have 682 participants who registered for the joining this webinar. So we are waiting until a couple minutes to go, another 7 minutes, and then we open.
Iya. Oh, ya pakai yang ini. Oh ya udah. Baik, itu Pak. Saya udah saya kirim invite. Iya, iya, iya.
Ready?
Ya, Pak.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Montreal. Good evening, Jakarta. Today we are going to start the very interesting discussions with the experts from Canada with the specialization of the Seaplane and Water Aerodrome in the webinar with the topics of international webinar, Canada-Indonesia sharing experience and expertise, Seaplane and Water Aerodrome operations. Before I'm going to greet some of the speakers, Mr. Andrew, good morning, Andrew Armstrong.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, also here with us, Michael Lett. Good morning, Michael Lett.
Good morning from Canada and good evening to Indonesia.
Okay, thank you for coming. And then we have also another speakers, Mr. Michael Herbert. Good morning, Michael Herbert.
Good morning, everyone.
Okay, today we have three speakers from Canada who are going to give sharing the experience and expertise in water aerodrome and seaplane operation in Canada. So before that, I'm going to review a little bit of the curriculum vitae of all of our speakers today. Could you please back to the, okay. And also with us now, we have some participants. Okay, this is the CV. Mr. Michael Ladd, Civil Aviation Inspector, Flight Standard Aerodrome, Transport Canada, Civil Aviations. With us, we have also the email contacts. So with all of the experience that Michael Ladd has, Michael Lett are going to present the presentations about the current legislations, application for certifications, current situations, applicable marine regulations. A second speakers will be Mr. Michael Herbert. Yeah. Michael Herbert is Civil Aviation Inspector, Flight Operation, Transport Canada. With all of the experience that's shown in the screens, Michael are going to present the presentation about high sea operations, maneuvering on the water, glassy water operations, single versus single and twin engine. And the last speaker will be Andrew Armstrong, Program Manager, Flight Crew License, Transport Canada, Flight Crew License, Transport Canada Civil Aviations, are going to present the presentations about regulations, applicant and instructor requirements and training. So, very thank you to all of the speakers. And here with us, we have some respondents, technical respondents, who are going to give some response to the speakers, to have some discussions. Representative from Director General Civil Aviations. We have Mr. Priyo. Good evening, Pak Priyo. Okay, first of all is Captain Trunisyogo, and also with some fellows, he is going to give some review also. And Pak Aris Wibowo from Director General Sea Transport. And the next, Mr. Roland Panjaitan, Alternate Representative Indonesia to IMO. We have also Mr. Budi Sampurno, our fellow experts from Indonesia Aerospace. And the last, Pak Kenny Luhung Prasojo, Director of Indonesia Pilot Academy. Okay. Thank you for your coming to all, and also with us here, I want to greet cadet from Indonesia Pilot Academy. Good evening, everybody. Good evening, cadets. Thank you for your coming. Okay, gentlemen, before we are going to the discussions, I'm inviting from CSAS to mention the regulations, rules and regulations for the policy and procedure for the webinar. CSAS, please, the meeting is yours.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Now I would like to read the policies and procedure to this Canada and Indonesia setting experience and expertise, seaplane and water aerodrome operation. For optimal viewing, access the webinar using a computer with a high-speed internet connection and audio speakers. Second, if you attend the webinar only using the phone option, there will be insufficient data while you attend our webinar. So make sure that every participant device on mute mode on microphone upon entry our webinar. We will give some participants time to take some discussion with the panelists by asking some questions. All participants can put their question in Q&A column, and CSAS will provide the panelists contact information after the webinar ends. And also the last is, participants can download their own certificate through the link below. Dalam bahasa Indonesianya, pada webinar ini kami akan membacakan aturan dan prosedurnya. Yang pertama, untuk mendapatkan hasil yang optimal, akses webinar kami dengan menggunakan komputer dengan kecepatan internet yang tinggi dan audio speaker yang baik. Selanjutnya, jika Anda memilih opsi untuk menggunakan smartphone, dikhawatirkan penggunaan data yang dibutuhkan tidak mencukupi selama kegiatan webinar berlangsung. Peserta juga dimohon agar perangkat setiap partisipan berada pada mode diam ketika masuk ke dalam webinar kami. Selanjutnya, kami akan memberikan partisipan waktu untuk dapat berdiskusi dengan panelis. Dan bagi seluruh partisipan yang ingin mengajukan pertanyaan, dapat memasukkan pertanyaan di kolom Q&A yang ada di menu Zoom-nya. Selanjutnya, CSAS akan memberikan kontak informasi panelis setelah kegiatan webinar selesai. Dan dapat mengunduh sertifikat pada link yang tertera di bawah ini. Terima kasih.
Thank you, CSS. To all of the speakers and participants, we are with us now, as you can see in the participants column, we have now 181 and counting up for the total participants at the moment. And now, for the first speakers, I give for Mr. Michael to give presentations on water aerodromes, current regulation application for certifications, current situations, applicable marine regulations. Please, Michael, the time is yours, 20 minutes maximum, please.
Okay, I'll try and keep it to 20 minutes. Thank you, Afan. And hello, everyone. Welcome to the Water Airports and Seaplane Operations presentation. Again, my name is Michael Ladd. I have 17 years in the industry of flying. In that time, it was I amassed 12,000 hours of flying. All of my flying has either been on gravel strips, ice strips, or float flying. So that's sort of my background. I've been with Transport Canada for about 5 years at this point, and my main file is working on the water aerodromes file. So that's a little bit about me, and I guess we can get on with this. Afin, if you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, these are some of the items that we're going to touch on today, starting with the water aerodromes. And then we'll get into some of the differences between flying a land aircraft versus a seaplane. And then finally, we'll get into our licensing requirements. I guess we can go to the next slide, Afin, please. Okay, water aerodromes. Oh, back up one slide there, please, Afin. Yeah, right there. Okay, water aerodromes. This is a picture of Vancouver Harbor. They have over 100 seaplane movements for scheduled passenger service going out of here in peak periods every day. This does not include charter or sightseeing trips. So as you can see, it's a very, very busy harbor for float flying. So in our minds, it might be time to have some water airport regulations. Next slide, please. And here I'm just going to start from the beginning. This is the act that Canada has currently. The act and regulations that govern our operating an aerodrome in Canada. The CARS regulations, as they're affectionately known, govern all of our civil aviation. Part 3 of the CARS is specific to airports, heliports, and it actually includes water airports at this time, but in a very limited capacity. And we can go to the next slide. I thought I would add this slide to catch your interest. It's a definition of an aerodrome in Canada. It's in our Aeronautics Act, but as you can see, any part of Canada can be an aerodrome, and that includes the frozen surfaces. I don't think you folks have that problem in Indonesia. So this may not be unique to Canada, but it does set us apart a little. In many parts of Canada, we can spend up to 6 months flying off the frozen lakes and rivers. So it just it is a big part of our Aeronautics Act, and I just thought I would throw that out there for you, just to pique your interest. And next slide, please. Our certification requirements for aerodromes to become an airport, whether they be land or water, in Canada are for the following reasons: a built-up area, a land aerodrome for scheduled passenger service, and lastly, the minister deems to be in the public interest. Our current regulations were mainly developed to capture land aerodromes and not really intended to capture water aerodromes, although as they stand now, they also include water airports, not and just not having any associated standards with those water airports. Although we do have some draft regulations that we rely on. I think everyone here knows what a built-up area is. It's basically the population density structure, large centers of groups of people, that sort of thing. So I won't spend too much time on it. The other one is scheduled passenger service, and it's a requirement for land aerodromes and heliports, and it does not apply to water aerodromes in this case. And this with places like Vancouver and Victoria, where we're getting a lot of scheduled passenger service, it's time to bring some regulations in for scheduled passenger service with water airports. So that's what we're working on at this point. I guess lastly, public interest is if for any other reason that the minister seems that there should be a certified facility, he has the authority to do that. So again, as you can see, when it comes to water aerodromes, they are only certified for being in a built-up area or if the minister deems to be in the public interest. It does not cover the scheduled passenger services like I had mentioned. This leaves a gap in our regulations when it comes to scheduled passenger service because heliports and land aerodromes both have the regulations in place for certification of that. So I guess essentially what I'm saying here is if you're a scheduled passenger and you go to an airline, you buy a ticket, you expect a certain level of safety and concerns that, you know, when you get on that airplane, that there's not going to be any issues and everybody is trained and just everything is set for that flight to go from point A to point B. And that's a reasonable expectation and a reasonable safety expectation for the traveling public. Those requirements are there for, as I said, land airplanes going from point A to point B. That same expectation is there for heliports going from point A to point B, but it is not there for water airports. So if you go down and buy a ticket for a scheduled flight in a float plane, you know, you could be stepping off of a rickety old dock. They may not have emergency boats. There may not be emergency services available. All these things that would be available at a certified land facility or heliport because of the scheduled passenger requirements. So it does leave a bit of a gap in our regulations, and this is what we're trying to address at this time. But as you guys probably know, because you're dealing with two different environments, marine and aviation, it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. In certain parts of Canada, primarily the West Coast, we have a large influx of the passengers traveling by seaplanes, and we feel the scheduled passenger service issue needs to be addressed by having our own set of regulations and standards specific to water aerodromes. And that is presently what we're working on at this point. If you could go to the next slide, please, Afan. So enhancing our regulations to include requirements for water airports are based on establishing a minimum level of safety and creating a baseline for all water airports similar to airports and heliports, but specific to water airports. Some of the items that we would like to address, you can see here in the slide. I won't go over them individually because I think everybody can probably see what they are. By establishing this baseline, it also creates a safer environment for the people working at the aerodrome itself. So, you know, dock crews and refueling crews, that sort of thing. It just provides a more safe environment. By introducing these new regulations for water airports, it also creates consistency throughout our own Part 3 regulations. So going back to the analogy of a land plane, heliport, and water airports, they would all have certification requirements for scheduled passenger services. By also creating water airport regulations, you can see some of the future possibilities that can be addressed to seaplane operations. By having a defined area to land and take off on the water, we're thinking that in the future that you can set up possible GNS approaches to these areas, which would help float plane operators in adverse weather going forward. And the other item that's coming along quite a bit is the use of night vision goggles and that technology. So maybe this can be tied in. And these are just ideas going forward with having water airport regulations. So, you know, there are possibilities here. Next slide, please. And No, I think you need to back up one there, Afin. Yep, there we go. We have proposed some amendments to our regulations, and some of the things that we would like to achieve with the amendments are in the following slides coming up here. This just goes back to establishing a basic level of safety and service at water airports, and to be consistent with other parts of our regulations, such as land airports and heliports. We understand that each site will be unique and adapted individually. So if you'd like to go to the next slide, Afin. Okay, there are minimum lengths and distances and depths that Canada feels comfortable with when it comes to the physical aspects of the layout of a water airport. You will notice that we have not put any limits on maximum dimensions. So these are minimum dimensions, and you can go as long and as wide as you want with the physical characteristics of what you want to lay out. So it leaves a lot of flexibility within the physical characteristics of the aerodrome. And we're going to come back to this slide. I've got it presented a little bit bigger in a couple slides here, because this is a very interesting slide, and I want to talk about it at length in a minute here. So Afin, if you could go to the next slide, please. So the last slide, you saw the physical characteristics of the water airport dimensions, minimum water depths, lengths, widths, that sort of thing. This one is the approach and obstacle limitation surfaces. These are, they've been established, and they've been on VFR minimum requirements, because at this point, all of our water airports are for VFR operations only at this time. There is no instrument, there is no night flying. It's strictly day VFR minimum requirements. And these requirements are equivalent to land aerodromes. As well, the design aspect took into account some of the STOL capabilities of most of the aircraft being used, such as the single otter, the twin otter, the Beaver. All of these aircraft have STOL capabilities. And I guess, I don't know if everybody knows what STOL capability is, but it's short takeoff and landing capabilities. And these airplanes are very adaptable to that. Next slide, please, Afin. Okay, like I said, we are going to this slide. I hope everybody can see it fairly well. It is a very interesting slide. I wanted to come back to this because it is Victoria. Victoria is a very busy port, which was certified, for which the minister deemed to be in the public interest, while using the draft regulations as guidance. So, you know, the runway lengths and approaches and things from the guidance material from the previous slides was used to certify Victoria, just because it was such a busy airport. They've been using, this airport's been certified for almost 20 years. But if you look closely at it, we have a lot of recreational sailors. There's rowers, scullers. We've got ferries in the neighborhood of 300 feet in length going in and out of here. We have commercial traffic like tugs and barges, that sort of thing. And they're all using this small area. And in amongst all of this, you have the float plane operations. And you can see that we have takeoff area Alpha, and we have takeoff area Bravo. And then to the side, you have the lanes for some of the recreational boaters and things, and they have to stay within their buoys. And then along the shore, closer to the shoreline, you have the rowers and other small boaters. So it's a very structured way that the facility is used. There's certain no-go areas for the aircraft because it's too shallow, that sort of thing. But when, say, the Coho ferry, which is, it's a ferry that goes between Victoria and Seattle, and I think it carries somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 cars on it. And it's about 300 or 400 feet long. It's a large vessel, and it needs to go down the middle of the runways. Same with some of the large commercial barges and things of that nature. Now, these vessels, when they are in the channel, the flight service station that is on the water there will radio to the pilots that, oh, the Coho is in the channel. And what that says to the pilots is they cannot take off and land in that area until the Coho has either exited the mouth of the marina or has docked at its mooring. And until that ship has cleared those lanes, those airplanes stay outside of that area in a holding pattern. Now, once that has cleared, the airplanes can come in and land and take off. There is also what is known as a bubble. And the bubble here is that the airplanes cannot come with 150 feet of a boat, a vessel, or anything else. So they can't just come in and land over top of somebody. They have to ensure that they are clear and within that bubble. Now, the other feature with this water airport is when these guys do commence their landing approach, there is a set of lights on some of the buoys and shorelines and area that start to flash, and that flash starts to allow some of the recreational boaters and the small little ferries, passenger ferries that go back and forth, that an airplane is inbound, and to absolutely stay out of the landing and takeoff area. So there's a lot going on in this slide, but we have been doing this for 20 years. This method works very, very well, and it just shows you what can be done in a tight harbor with float plane operations. And they have over 100 movements of float planes a day in Victoria, just to let you know. So I thought I would just spend a little bit of time on that slide. I guess we can go to the next slide here now, please. Okay, this is still part of our regulations. And now one of the key components to the certification process in Canada is the Water Airport Operations Manual. This manual is an approved and controlled document that describes to the Minister of Transport how the water airport will run day-to-day activities, as per the conditions set out in their water airport certificate. This operations manual covers everything on the slide, as well as docks, safety equipment, emergency response plans. Basically, it covers everything you need to know about the water airport. So, I mean, we call it a safety boat, but in the operations manual, it'll state that, you know, this boat needs to go out every morning and check the defined takeoff areas and landing areas to see if there's any flotsam debris, that sort of thing, if there's any hazards that have drifted into that area, this sort of thing. The boat has to also be large enough that if the aircraft becomes disabled for any reason, it can go out and assist. Just things of this nature. But all of these kind of requirements would be addressed in the operations manual. So it's a very key component of the whole certification process for us here in Canada. And I guess we can go to the next slide, please, Afan. Okay. We are, as I say, we are working on the water aerodrome regulations, and they're still being fine-tuned. But I just wanted to mention as well that there are some other things that we've done to address float plane or seaplane safety here in Canada. We've had life vests are mandatory for passengers to be worn, and that is starting in September of 2021. There's a lot of argument to this one, and it was a tough one to get through, because I don't know if anybody knows about seaplane operations very much, but if you have an airplane that has flipped over on the water and you're upside down in the water in the aircraft and you inflate your life vest, you're going to stick to the bottom of the airplane. You have to exit the airplane first before you can inflate your life jacket. And in the panic, sometimes that may not happen. But just looking at seaplane accidents and aviations, they found that more people drowned sort of once they got out of the airplane from the cold exposure to the water and stuff, and that they thought that life vests would help in these situations. So that one was a bit of a tough one. I think you might find a 50-50 split between float plane operators and pilots on whether this is a good thing or not, but it is coming to Canada in 2021. The other thing here, and this is a big one, and I think it will help immensely, and it's the emergency egress training for pilots. And basically what that is a dunk tank. And basically it's a rig that's set up at a swimming pool. You're put in it, and there's a couple divers in the water. And what they do is they basically have you close your eyes, you hit the water, the whole tank flips upside down, and then you have to be able to undo your seatbelt, undo the door handles, and get out and extricate yourself from the dunk tank, which is usually in the shape of the fuselage of the primary airplane that you're flying. So, and then they go through this for several hours through the day in different scenarios and that sort of thing. And they've found that that has helped immensely with extricating yourself, and you know, once the pilot can get out, he can turn around and help the passengers get out as well. So, and that regulation is coming into effect in Canada in 2022. They've been slowed down a little bit because of this whole COVID-19 item. So, yeah, those are a couple of things that are coming. We can go to the next slide. Afin, please. Yeah, the water and air. We've touched on a lot of the aviation side of seaplanes, but what about the marine side? We know a seaplane is an aircraft when flying, but it's also a vessel when operating on the water. And so it must abide by the marine regulations as well here. So, sorry, I'm gonna take a drink here. My mouth's getting a little dry, sorry. So let's have a quick look at these regulations. These are the acts that govern the water. The Aeronautics Act is shown here because there are some very basic nautical rights of ways specific to seaplanes in it. But the main acts are the Canada Marine Act and the Canada Shipping Act, which govern operations on the water. And we can go to the next slide, please. And in this slide, you can see the definition of a Marine Act, and it does specifically include seaplanes specifically. So when a seaplane is on the water, it is officially a vessel. And let's go into the next slide, please. This is basically, this is the rights of ways that are listed in the Aeronautics Act, and they're very basic. It's just if you're going head to head against somebody, each airplane keeps to the right, you know, the airplane on the right coming, or the ship on the right has the right of way. You know, it's very basic stuff, but it's there to make the pilots aware, and that they should have an idea of the water airport regulations, and for them to go and get familiar with the marine regulations as well, because they do apply. And where are we here? I guess the next slide here would be okay, yeah, let's go here. Slide 17, and transition of an aircraft to a vessel. Now this is an interesting one. These are some of the issues that we've come across in Canada over the years, and we've had a few public groups that oppose seaplane flying and this sort of thing, especially in some of the larger harbors like Victoria and Vancouver and just areas of that, because there is a lot of movement going on here. And one of the arguments is, well, you know, the harbor has a 5 mile an hour speed limit, but the airplane is taking off at 80 miles an hour. So it's violating the marine regulations. Well, there are no specific regulations in the marine regulations or in the aviation regulations, but these two bullets have come to be the accepted standard or practice for aviation. So basically, when a seaplane is deemed to be an aircraft from the point of initial intent to take off, so that's when the pilot is sitting at the end of the water channel, he's looking ahead, there's no boats or obvious obstacles in his way, and his intent is to power up at this point and go flying. At that point, he is now an aircraft in the eyes of the regulators. Again, when coming in and landing, that same airplane is considered a vessel once the airplane comes off the step. So once it's stopped skimming across the water and has settled into the water, it is now a vessel, and it's maneuvering on the water, and it has to stay within, say, those 5 mile an hour restrictions. But those are just some of the obstacles that we've come across over the years. And like I say, these two bullets have basically become accepted practice for this. So, and that's basically my presentation. It's this is how it is in Canada. You folks are probably happy to get through the bureaucratic and the regulatory process of this, because you probably want to get on to the part 2 of this, the actual seaplane operations, the exciting stuff. So I'll say thank you very much at this point, and turn the presentation back over to Afan. And I hope I stayed within my 20-minute time frame. Thank you, everybody.
Mute, Pak Afan.
Did we lose Afan?
Still mute, Pak. Still mute, Pak Afan.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Sorry, since now we have 250 participants with us in this webinar, so please pay attention to the column and answer. Some questions addressed to you already, and we give in the last sessions your opportunity to give feedback to the questions. Okay, the second speakers, I'm inviting Mr. Michael Herberts, Civil Aviation Safety Inspector, Flight Operations, to give presentations about the seaplane operations, high sea operations, maneuver on the water, glassy water operations, single and twin engine. Michael, the meeting is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening. My name is Michael Hebert with Transport Canada. I've been with Transport Canada for about 5 years. Previous to that, most of my career, about 10,000 hours flying hours, and about 8,000 of those flying floats, mostly on the Twin Otter, and international experience, either flying in the Maldives or helping set up an operation, outside of Canada. So that's been the most of my career before joining Transport. So we were asked to deliver this presentation today on Seaplane Operations. I guess in 20 minutes, it wouldn't be possible to cover everything that, for Seaplane Operations. So, we're going to try and cover the most commonly asked questions. And certainly if there are any other questions after the presentation, you'll have our contact info. Feel free to send me or Michael an email, and we will get back to you. But as a whole, for Seaplane Operations, when you're in the air, the plane is like a regular airplane, whether it's on wheels or on a seaplane on floats. There's not a big difference, It's non-retractable float, so you have the additional drag, which affects you in flight. But otherwise, there's no differences in the air. On the water, though, it becomes a bit more complex, sometimes challenging. You can't just, request to stop, pull the park brake, and start, go thinking about plan B. It's like a boat. Unless you're tied up and you're secured, you're always on the move. The most common ways to secure is to go to a dock, like a boat. Find a buoy, tie up, and or have an anchor, and that would be your methods of equivalent to a park brake, I guess. There's challenges as well that you'll see that you wouldn't necessarily on a land airplane. You're operating often in an uncontrolled environment. You're left to make your own choices for the selection of takeoff and landing area. That comes with other challenges depending on where you're operating. If it's a well-known area, like Michael showed you the pattern in Victoria, they have designated landing and takeoff areas, and pilots have been in and out of there many of times. But if less in a not so busy area, you can have challenges from obstacles under the water, that you're tide dependent, whether you can taxi through certain channels. Boat traffic, some boats, maybe it's the first time they've seen a seaplane, they're curious, they may approach you, they may stop to watch you land or take off. They may want to race with you once you start taking off. You don't know. So it's things, just a few of many things that you may encounter when you're Seaplane Operations. But as a whole, it's always safety first, and it's the same thing. If you're not sure, it's not different in that way. So that's just a quick brief on Seaplane Operations. So then with that, weather dependent, you can have high sea state operations, and that we recommend finding a protected area for takeoff and landing. So depending on the winds and the tides, you can have fairly large water to operate in. This could be seasonal winds, westerly or easterly. You may not always be able to operate at your same location, whether you're operating in a bay, then you'd be protected, but sometimes you just on a point, maybe you need docks on both sides where, you know, sometimes it's usable in certain winds, certain conditions, and other times it's not. So you need an alternate location. With a seaplane, you always want to land into wind as much as possible, like any airplane, you know, land into wind. However, there's certain water conditions that may require you to parallel swell. So that's also an option. So now you're dealing with a crosswind and wanting to parallel the swell to minimize the impact of, depending on the wave height that you're landing into. That there's guidance material on that, and when you get to that point, the company that you work for, it'll be part of the training program. But those are options when operating in large water, swelly water. So you want to also minimize the time that you're on the water for takeoff, and you want to stop as soon as possible when landing in large waters. So it's preferable to have a STOL-capable aircraft for the short takeoff and landing. These airplanes are designed to operate in harsh conditions. We can go to the next slide, please. Glossy water operations. Often people like to talk about glossy water operations because if you can often, that could be one of your best landings of your career, because if you can just land, sometimes you don't even know whether you've actually touched down or not. So it can be a lot of fun, and it can be challenging depending where you are. Glossy water degrades your depth perception, and it's difficult to visually determine what your altitude is once you're entering your final phase of flight. For this, you'd overfly where you're landing. Get a good reference point on the water or a shoreline where next to your touchdown area. That this is where you want to plan your approach. It's no low altitude turns once you're on setting up for a landing on glossy water. You want to have a descent rate for 100 or 200 feet per minute on a stable approach. You'll want to plan your approach with more space than you normally would, just under normal circumstances. And patience. So you plan a nice long approach, stable with a low descent rate, and at about 75 feet or 100 feet, you'll transition into that touchdown attitude. And again, it's patience. You just have to, you don't want to come into that stall. You don't want to stall, but you just have to be patient and have that attitude and wait till you touch the water. And normally that's a pretty smooth landing. It's a technique that requires practice, but with a good, stable, well-planned approach and a good visual reference, this is just a normal landing in a normal part of your day. You want to plan for a longer landing distance when you're approaching. It's common to fly a little longer. We say that you're floating a bit, and that's where you're in that zone where you're just waiting for touchdown. And 200 or 300 feet can go by fairly quick. So you don't want to put yourself into a tight spot when you're landing on glassy water. The next slide, please. Maneuvering on the water, I guess that's a big difference from land airplanes. One of the most important things is to be aware prior to maneuvering on the water is your wind direction and strength. Right from when you untie from the dock, if it's an offshore, you're leaving the dock regardless. If you have 20 knots of wind, for example, and it's offshore, regardless of what you're doing, you're leaving the dock, and you're leaving the dock fairly quickly. So hopefully you have a plan of you're aware of what your surrounding area obstacles or other aircrafts that are parked in the area, because yeah, like I said, whether you're controlling with your power or not, you are leaving the dock. On an onshore, it's like a boat, but the difference is you have the tail section of the airplane is what's going to drive the direction of your airplane. So as soon as you untie the ropes on a twin otter, for example, on an offshore wind, that tail is immediately leaving the dock. So with a twin otter, though, you have differential power, so you could you can do the opposite and pin the tail, however, but again, that's just technique, but it's just to give you an example of the importance of knowing your wind direction and speed and the effect that it will have on the aircraft as soon as you're no longer tied up or secured to a buoy. And an aircraft always wants to, if you leave one just sitting in the water, it'll always turn into wind. And then you can sail. So if you need to hold, for example, just wait. Maybe you need a parking spot. You know, you can do a turn, or you can put some flaps down, have a lower power setting, and sail into or just some airplanes you can just sit almost sit still almost on your same spot. But you know, sailing is common. You know, we put some flaps down, and the airplane just sits into wind. Learn how to read the wind even without a windsock. I know most water aerodromes have a windsock, but after you know, most seaplane pilots learn quickly to be aware of what the wind is doing. There's lots of indicators from the air. You know, wind lines. You can read that, smokestacks, flags. So because it's so important to know what your wind is doing, and you're affected by it when you're on the water, you naturally look for these wind indicators that will help you make your job a lot easier. And it's important also to have information on tides. Be aware of high and low tides if you're operating in an area where you have several meters of, you know, change during a course of 3 or 4 hours. Whether you're if you're doing a flight and you know, your next flight's not for 4 or 5 hours, you know, that may change when you leave the dock, which channel you came in. Be aware of the area. Many of times this is local knowledge, but yeah, it's important. It's a good to know the area that you're maneuvering in. And next slide, please. Single versus twin engine operations. Well, single engine normally is a single pilot operation. Can be a higher workload. You're by yourself. Sometimes you have self-docking. In most cases where you have that I've seen, if you have scheduled passenger service in larger areas where you have several aircraft on the dock, there's normally dock staff there for your arrival and your departure, which make it a lot easier. Otherwise, on a single engine airplane, you plan your approach depending on the winds to the dock. You'd shut down the engine, and then you're committed to get to jumping out on the float and tying up that airplane. And that's that also requires practice, and again, it's all about the wind. It could be very easy, or it could be very difficult depending on the wind. Single engine airplanes, they use water rudders for directional control. So speed and momentum is important when you're approaching the dock. They're less maneuverable than a twin engine. But the twin engine is normally 2 crew. Self-docking is not recommended due to the location, the propellers. So it'd be very difficult to exit the aircraft and try and tie up a float. But you have differential thrust for your controlling. So you can drive, you can taxi much like a land airplane. So it makes it much easier to approach a dock in all wind conditions. It still can be challenging in high winds. However, the directional control that you have is really helps to make that approach to the dock and securing the airplane. Next slide, please. So there's the Twin Otter. That's in Vancouver. There's a Single Otter. So both are very commonly used here in Canada. And we have out of Vancouver, I think now they have 4 Twin Otters and many Single Otters that go between Victoria, Vancouver, and Nanaimo daily. And we've attached some links here, some helpful links that some guidance. There's lots of the seaplane community has lots of people that like to share their experience, whether it's on YouTube or just videos that you have access to, and that's the same for all types of operations like Glossy water or anything like that. There's lots of information available on the web, and that covers it for me for Seaplane Operations. I hope that this was helpful, and thank you for today.
Thank you, Michael Herberts, for the very clear and comprehensive informations. So I believe, as Michael led, you may proceed to the QA. And for Mr. Michael led, you have already so many questions that you have to address. The third speakers. Okay, at the end, I give you the opportunity to answer. Okay, the last speakers will be Mr. Andrew Armstrong with the regulations, applicant, and instructor requirements and training. So, Mr. Andrew Armstrong, the meeting is yours.
Yes, thank you, FA, and good evening, everyone. I'll give you a brief introductory about myself. After high school, I went into an aviation college program that lasted 3 years. I got my commercial multi-IFR out of that. After that, I went into instructing, got my instructor rating, instructed for about 12 years. For 10 of those years, I was the chief flight instructor for various schools. One of the schools I was at for about 5 years was associated with an aviation management program, yet most of the people there wanted to become pilots. In the last couple of years with that school, we actually developed our commercial license program on floats. So people would do their private pilot licenses on a wheeled airplane, transition over to floats, and then do about 100 to 120 hours on float planes while they obtained their commercial license. And then if they wanted to, did their multi-engine and IFR as well. And that was quite interesting. And then after that, I got into transport for about 18 years with the flight training and licensing side of things. So what I'm going to talk about today are just some of the regulations, some of the requirements to obtain a seaplane rating, some of the requirements for instructors to instruct on a seaplane rating. And then the main part is just actually about the training for seaplane ratings and just a few slides on commercial operations. Good. So if we could go to the next slide, we'll talk about regulations. In Canada, we talk about airplane class ratings. There are 3 class ratings. There's the land plane rating, which most people, when they're doing their training, are doing their training on a land plane. So when they get their license, they automatically get the land plane class rating. There's the seaplane class rating that allows you to do everything that your license says you can do. However, you can do it on a seaplane. And then the third one is a multi-engine rating. So we're obviously talking about the seaplane class rating here. A seaplane class rating can only be put onto one of our airplane licenses, a private commercial or airline transport license. We also have in there a pilot permit recreational, which is just it's like a mini version of a private pilot license. However, it's intended for people only here in Canada. It's designed with fewer hours, so not as expensive to get that type of permit. You can only carry 1 passenger with you, that sort of thing. But all those airplane licenses, you can get a seaplane rating on it. You might ask, why not helicopters? In Canada, every different helicopter requires a separate helicopter type rating. I don't know offhand how many helicopters can actually be on floats. I don't think it's that many, but if you were operating a helicopter on floats, when you got the type rating for that helicopter, you should have done some training on that helicopter to get the type rating that would allow you to do some stuff on the floats. One thing about the seaplane rating, when we look at it here in Canada, most people have the airplane license already, whether it be a private, a commercial, or an airline transport license. So they're already a skilled pilot. So the seaplane rating is really designed for somebody who already has the experience, already knows how to fly an airplane. You're just looking now at a different medium as opposed to landing and taking off on land. You're now landing or taking off on the water. So it's just training that pilot to have the skills to do that in that different medium. However, you will find that when you're landing or taking off on land as opposed to water, when you're doing it on water, you do require superior judgment just because there's so many more things that you need to look at and there's so many other things that could happen or go wrong. Next slide. Yeah, so the privileges, basically the holder of the license who's been endorsed with a class rating, so endorsed with a seaplane rating, can basically do anything that that license allows them to do. However, they can do it now on the water as well as on land. And here in Canada, all our licenses and permits require a valid medical. Depending on commercial or ATPL, you need your class 1 medical. Here in Canada, for the private license, we require what's called a class 3 medical. For the recreational pilot permit, we here in Canada again have what's called a class 4 medical, which is just a medical designed for pilots here in Canada and only flying in Canada. So requirements to get the seaplane rating. These are our standards that say this is what you need to get a seaplane rating. Yeah, you need a minimum of 7 hours seaplane training. That includes 5 hours of dual instruction, requires a minimum of 5 takeoffs and landings as a sole occupant of the airplane, unless it was for chance a 2-crew aircraft, in which case it would have to be as a pilot in command. The following exercises have to be included in the seaplane training: taxiing, sailing, docking, takeoffs, landing, and as conditions exist, operations on glassy water, rough water, crosswind conditions. Here in Canada, one other thing that our requirements don't talk to, however, I'm going to bring it up here, is insurance requirements. For example, we've had flight schools who have said, is it possible for the students to do the 5 takeoffs and landings solo? It says solo, however, they want to have somebody else in the aircraft with the pilot. And they've said that, well, that's because the insurance won't let them have insurance to let the pilots go flying solo because they don't have that much experience. So sometimes here in Canada, we have our requirements for that. This is what we're required to get the seaplane rating. However, insurance companies may impose a stricter requirement depending on what the situation is. However, we find that the requirement for the solo time is just like with a private license. You know, a private license, somebody may require about 12 hours of solo time. That solo time is very important because you're the only one in the aircraft. You're the one that has to make the decisions. If you always have somebody there with you kind of making decisions on your behalf, well, you're not getting the full training experience and experience you require to get the seaplane rating. Next, we have here to get the seaplane rating. Actually, no, go back one slide there. Yeah, the skill test. In order to get the seaplane rating here in Canada, you basically have to be recommended by the person who's done the training on you. So within the 12 months preceding the date of the application, you have to have successfully completed a qualifying flight, either with a Transport Canada inspector. That's usually not the case though. Usually it's somebody in industry, or a person qualified in accordance with our CAR. And they have to demonstrate a level of skill specified in the instructor guide seaplane rating. We're going to actually talk about the instructor guide in about 6 or 7 slides of this presentation. But it's basically, you do your training, the person who trains you says, yes, you've demonstrated the acceptable level of skill as specified in our instructor seaplane guide, and they recommend you for the seaplane rating. So who can do that recommendation? If you go to the next slide, the instructor, we have our standard. It says a person who conducts flight training towards the issuance of a land plane or a seaplane class rating, they have to hold a commercial license or an ATPL license. They have to have at least 50 hours of flight time on the class of airplane used for the training. What we find here in Canada is there's a lot of flight schools who offer this training. And because they're part of a flight school, usually the instructor has an instructor rating as well. So they've been trained in how to teach people. We don't make that a requirement here because lots of times as well, we get people near the end of their career who want to come back or keep flying, and they offer themselves to do flight training. So you look at people like Michael, I think both Michaels there who gave the other presentations. The amount of experience and flight hours they have on float planes would make them very well qualified to be able to teach for people to get their float rating. So that is the requirement for somebody to instruct a seaplane rating here in Canada. Next slide, please. I've given the link here. This is to the instructor guide for the seaplane rating that we've issued from Transport Canada. It's about a 47-page document, so it covers quite a lot of stuff. These are the main 6 headings: organizing the training, planning and preparation, water handling, the takeoff, the approach and landing, and advanced exercises. So when people are teaching people a seaplane rating, we expect them to use this guide, try and teach as much as they can. Obviously, they can't teach everything. For example, someone in central Canada can't be teaching people how to fly on or off the ocean, or where you have tides, that sort of thing. So you basically teach as much as you can out of this to get the person prepared as much as possible. Next slide. So we'll start with the organize the training. When we're talking about the rating itself, yes, it's more demanding than flying on wheels. Also, when you look at flying on floats, chances are you're flying to a lot of places where you don't have any weather information, you don't have flight planning information. You may or may not have refueling. The refueling you have may be out of barrels. There may not be any air traffic control services and that. So when you look at the rating itself, there's a whole lot of stuff that we need to train. When we talk about ground training, there's no mandated ground school that people have to take. However, it is a very good idea to do some sort of ground school for the float plane rating. You need to cover stuff like the float terminology, all the different terminology used on float planes, all that sort of stuff. Use of the water aerodrome supplement. In Canada, we have a supplement that talks about all the different water aerodromes and the services offered there. Using equipment such as float pumps, safety vests, survival equipment. Seaplane performance is obviously different on water than the aircraft would be on land. So what are those differences? Rules of the water, as we're talking about in previous, you have to know when you're on the water, you're basically like a boat. So you have to know all the rules of a boat, as well as any local traffic procedures, including any special use airspace. For example, if somebody were to be flying into that Victoria water aerodrome for the first time, there would be a bunch of stuff they would have to do in order to prepare themselves to fly in there. Other stuff such as airwork, because you've got floats, the aircraft does handle a bit differently. So stuff like steep turns and stalls, it would be good to do a little bit of that, just so people can see how the aircraft handles a bit differently. Amphibious operations. Use of checklists is quite important. If you have an aircraft that can land on both water and land, you have to make sure you're prepared for that landing and in the proper configuration. There have been so many accidents where somebody has landed on water with the wheels down or landed on land with the wheels up because they haven't followed a checklist. Some principles of learning and just demonstration and performance teaching. We explain what you're doing, demonstrate how to do it, let the student imitate it, and then critique them, offering them ways to correct any issues that may have come up. Control of the aircraft. You always got to make sure who's in control of the aircraft. Nothing worse than coming in to do a landing and the student thinks you're demonstrating the landing and you think the student is practicing the landing. So you always have to make sure you have who has control of the aircraft. Awareness, attitude, discipline, all things that need to be taken into account. And then it talks a bit about recommending the person for the rating, and some of the headings that are in our training manual are explained here as well. Next slide. So planning and preparation. So important thing when you're training somebody on floats is figuring out aircraft performance. On land, it's fairly close. It says you're going to take, 800 feet of a takeoff run. On land, chances are most of the time it's going to be pretty close to that. However, on water, there's so many different things you need to think about or that may affect the aircraft that you need to take those into account. Seaplane bases, rules around them, aids to marine navigation you have to think about. Fueling the aircraft, again, whether it's out of a barrel somewhere or somebody else is refueling the aircraft for you. Various differences for the pre-flight inspection. Passenger safety briefing is quite important. If you've taken somebody flying who's never been in a float plane before, all the stuff about dock surfaces, are they slippery? Be careful when you're getting into and out of the float plane because you don't want to slip and fall into the water. Safety equipment, life vests, how do you use that? Emergency egress, again, if something happens and the plane flips over on the water, you gotta make sure your passengers know how to get out, what to do, and when to inflate their life vests if it's an inflatable type. Starting at the engine, you know, once you've started the engine and cast off the dock, you're now a boat, you're at the mercy of the wind. You have to know how to handle the aircraft. And not just wind, currents as well, because the wind may be affecting you, but currents might affect you in a different way. And at the end of each of these sections, there's a completion standard that talks about kind of what you would expect from a student to be able to do. I won't go through the completion standards. If you get the chance, you can go to the document yourself and look at those. The next slide, water handling. Again, when you're teaching somebody for the seaplane rating, we talk about taxiing, but again, on land, there's one type of taxiing, whereas on the water, there's displacement taxiing, there's plowing taxiing, there's step taxiing, there's sailing. Also stuff like docking, beaching. So if you're just coming up onto a sand beach, mooring, abnormal water handling situations, all those different things would need to be taught to somebody when they're learning how to fly and learning how to get the seaplane rating. Next slide. Takeoff. We're going to be teaching the people how to do a normal takeoff, a glassy water takeoff, a crosswind takeoff, engine failures after takeoff. What are they going to do? Where are they going to land? So again, during somebody's training for the seaplane rating, you want to cover as much of these different types of takeoffs as possible. Not so much, possibly not so much in some of the aerodromes where there's just a large area of water where you can land. But for example, here in Canada, just up to the north of us here, we have a lot of lakes, small rivers. So sometimes there might be times when you're trying to land on the water where you can't land into, you have to land with a crosswind or take off with a crosswind. So it's always important to have those abilities with you. Next slide. The approach and landing, you're teaching them how to do a power on approach and landing. Well, what if they've had an engine failure and they're landing in the water? So we teach them how to do a power off approach and landing, crosswind approach and landings, landing over obstacles, glassy water. Michael was talking about glassy water landings there for a bit. Recovery from abnormal situations. For example, you've landed and you don't pull back enough on the control column and the floats start to dig into the water. How do you handle that? Porpoising, especially, for example, glass water landing. If you've set up your rated ascent and it's a bit too high, you might hit the water, bounce back up into the air, and then bounce back down. So recovering from abnormal situations such as porpoising is quite important. Next slide. Advanced exercises, ramping. So you've landed on the water and there's a ramp to come up. If you have, for example, a float plane, amphibious float plane with wheels, you can put the wheels down and just drive it up onto the ramp. However, you gotta be very careful with that. Water rudders, you have to make sure water rudders are up so they don't get damaged. All sorts of rough water, how much rough water is too rough that you can't take off or land. Confined areas, you know, doing step taxiing. So you have a lot of speed so you can taxi around and take off in a confined area. Rough water approach and landings, steep or step turns, fueling from barrels. All these are different advanced exercises that you want to try and teach people. Again, you can't teach them everything and situations could be different. You just want to try and give them as much information as they can. So when they are out there flying and they come across a situation, hopefully they're well enough prepared to deal with that situation. And so that covers the 6 main sections of that training guide. It's a very useful guide. Again, if you guys want to, you can download it, you can take a look at it, see what it says. It is all quite interesting. The next slide there. I just briefly talked about commercial operations in Canada with our regulations. There's very few specific regulations for seaplane operations. When you look at our commercial operations, The pilots have to have training and checking pursuant to the type of operation. So if they're doing float flying in their operation, their training and checking should be in the float airplane. The operations manual, float operators need to include procedures unique to their environment. Float operators shall include passenger and cabin safety procedures unique to their environment. And that's right down to, boarding and unboarding people from the plane. Are they stepping on the float and then going up some steps? Is it slippery? Do you have older passengers who need help? So you'll need somebody there to help them in and out of the aircraft. All things that you need to take into account when you're doing a commercial operation. Yeah, just like the last one there, passengers on float planes are alerted to the hazards unique to getting on and deboarding these aircraft. And then just the next slide. And again, Michael's talked to this already. We've had some new regulations that are coming out in 2021 and 2022 for the egress training. And flotation devices have to be worn by the pilot and the passenger, which means you need to give a very good briefing. For example, if it's an inflatable type, that they don't inflate it until they're out of the plane. So briefings to passengers is very important these days, and the egress training, as we said, has now been mandated every 3 years. So on initial training for the pilot, and then every 3 years if they're doing some sort of float, commercial float training. And that's my presentation. I thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Andrew Armstrong. Very detailed and comprehensive presentations. And you may proceed to the QA column, just in case some questions addressed to you. And after this, I'm going to invite some of technical respondents from Indonesia. The first opportunity I'm going to give to Mr. Aris Wibowo, representing of Director General of Sea Transport. Pak Aris Wibowo, please, for the statement or questions, I give you maximum 10 minutes. The meeting is yours, Pak Aris.
Terima kasih, Pak Aven. Good evening, everyone. It's very interesting to see presentation from Mr. Michael Letts regarding the regulation on the seaplane operation. That in the Port of Victoria is already facilitate the seaplane operation. If we talk about the seaplane operation in Indonesia, I'm from Directorate General of Sea Transport. Shipping and port is regulated under the law number 17, 2009. And in the law number 17, the definition of vessel doesn't specifically explain about the seaplane. So therefore, technical guidelines of port development and port master plan doesn't cover technical issues related port operation and port infrastructure design on seaplanes. I think what we need now is requirement of domestic comprehensive operation and facilitation regulation for seaplane transport system. And I think, Pak Avan, we need to keep continuous communication with Canada side to share knowledge on developing standard and regulation on port development. And I think we need also references from other countries, Pak Avan, that already have regulations and also have experiences on this seaplane operation. That's what I can explain about the view from the Directorate General of Sea Transport. Yes, until now we don't have any standard or any guidelines or how the port and harbor can facilitate the seaplane operation in our port operation. That's my comment, Pak Aven. Thank you very much. Back to you, Pak Evan.
Okay. Pak Aris, one more question, Pak Aris, to you. Since Indonesia DCCA Civil Aviation and Transport Canada Civil Aviation Authority are now preparing the MOU regarding to some part of them are regarding to the water aerodrome and seaplane issues. Do you have any expectations from the Directorate General of Sea Transport side to the to Transport Canada?
Yes, I think if the from Canada side can share first of all about the technical guidelines on the port operations, which can accommodate the vessel operation alongside with the seaplane operation. That will be good, Pak Aven, so we can learn first before we can have deeper discussion about this.
Okay, thank you, Pak Aris. Thank you for your technical response. The second opportunity I'm going to give to the representative from Directorate General of Civil Aviation. In this case, we have two respondents. At least the first one is from a Directorate of Airport Operations and Airworthiness. For this opportunity, I'm going to invite Captain Trinusiogo. Captain Trinusiogo, you are still in the mute mode, Pak Tri. Yes. Back to mute, Pak. You are still in the mute mode, Pak. Okay.
Unmute.
Can you just increase the volume, Pak? Your volume is probably still have. We cannot hear you, Pak.
Telepati.
Apa?
Kelihatannya masih mute itu.
Pak Tri, radio check, Pak Tri. We still cannot hear you, Pak Tri. Okay, Pak Tri, while we waiting for these technical issues, I give the second opportunity to representing the Directorate of the Airport Service. Pak Tri, Directorate of Airport Service, Pak Priyo. Pak Trinusiogo, we cannot hear you anything, Pak Tri. Pak Trinusiogo, since I can hear you, I give the opportunity to the second, maybe Pak Ali Ridho Sahab.
7600, please.
Pak Ali Ridho.
Oke. Selamat malam. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih Bapak Moderator, Pak Avensena. Suara saya terdengar?
Oke, loud and clear, Cap.
Oke, mungkin saya mewakili Kapten Trinusiogo, tapi semoga nanti Captain
Back again to
Trino
Captain
Siogo
Lee.
bisa solving dan bisa memberikan penyampaian. Baiklah, yang terhormat Bapak Dr. Avensena, atas Perhubungan Republik Indonesia di Kanada dan representatif Republik Indonesia pada IQ di Montreal, yang juga pada malam ini sebagai moderator kita. Yang terhormat Bapak Wisnu Daryono, Presiden CSAS Indonesia. The honorable speakers. Yes.
Could you please in English, Pak? So we honoring our colleagues from Canada, Pak. Excuse me.
Yeah, the honorable speakers on webinar, Captain Michael Lett, Civil Aviation Inspector, Flight Standard Aerodrome, Transport Canada. The honorable Captain Michael Hibbert, Civil Aviation Inspector, Flight Operation Transport Canada. The honorable Captain Andrew Armstrong, Program Manager, Flight Crew Licensing Transport Canada. And all respondent expertise and also aviation expertise and all participant webinar. I just introduce myself. I'm Ali Ridho Shahab, Flight Operation Inspector from the GCA Indonesia. And on behalf Captain Trino Siogo as Deputy Director Direktorat Standar, I just give like a respondent for this webinar, and also give thanks and appreciate for all speakers from Authority Air Transport Standard has provide and sharing information and experience for us. At the moment, Indonesia have one operator, non-commercial, is operated by MAF. MAF use caravan amphibian, and we have two operators, commercial, operate two caravan amphibian by Travira Air, and two twin otter amphibian by Airfast. And of course, we hope more operator interesting. And also, we hope Indonesian Pilot School, Banyuwangi, maybe can continue realization, the planning for develop additional seaplane rating in Indonesia, maybe for single and for multi-engine sea. Yeah, please for way and stay up the spirit for Indonesia Pilot School in Banyuwangi. Okay, for efficient time, I have some question for speakers. The first question for Captain Michael Lett and Captain Michael Hibbert. Maybe you can share information regarding flight plan or landing permission for commercial in water base or water spot in Canada. Is it possible if any passenger or customer interests for charter the flight, maybe to some island for beaching or lake or river from particular airport, example for maybe use amphibian aircraft for commercial flight. And if like a permission are required in Canada, if the operator will be plan the flight, the commercial charter to there, what the maybe permission required in Canada, and how the permission also are required if operator plan only for training purpose in water spot. Maybe permission is more simple or still any required, maybe you can explain or describe for us. And the second question for Captain Andrew Armstrong, any statement the minimum number of hours for PIC qualification and experience for commercial flight? I see you present 7 hours is for training initial, yeah, but is for commercial, become to be commercial, maybe any specific in the regulation Canada, or only depend to the operator's manual? I think that's the question for me, and hopefully the speakers can answer or share information. Thank you, Captain. And terima kasih, Pak Aven. Selamat malam.
Thank you, Pak Ali. Thank you, Captain Alindo. Back to you, Pak Trinusyogo. Captain Tri, are you still there? Okay. The next opportunity I'm going to give to the representative, Pak Trinusyogo, are you there? Seems you still have problem with the volume issues, Pak. Okay. Pak Dwi. Okay. For the next respondent, I'm inviting our fellow friends from airport service, Pak Dwi Afrianto. Pak, the meeting is yours, Pak.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Aven, as a moderator. Good evening from Indonesia for Mr. Clark, Mr. Herbert, and Mr. Armstrong. Thanks for your presentation regarding Canada's perspective on seaplane and water aerodromes operation. And also we thank you, CSAS, to host this webinar. Hopefully this will bring common understanding in water aerodrome and seaplane operating standard as Canada and Indonesia successfully assure AQ in the last assembly. The important to incorporate this issue in the existing standard and recommended practices. According to Mr. Red and Mr. Herbert, as well as Mr. Armstrong, we have some comments and questions. The first is, as we understand that from your presentation, water aerodrome in Canada function as a public airport. As we know that in Indonesia there are also 4 water aerodrome certified by DGCA. Its functions for private operation only. And according to our presidential decree, we will plan to construct 5 water aerodrome for public transport as well by 2023. For this issue that there are a combination operation as well as mixed management between the air navigation and marine navigation, so that we would like to know more detail how Canada transportation agency manage this kind of combination operation between marine navigation and air navigation. As we know that during taxiing on water, this navigation managed by marine navigation. We don't have experience on these issues, so that we would like to know more detail about this from Canada perspective. And the second question is as Mr. Lat presentation that in terms of proposed amendment to regulation said that the proposed process for water airport certification is in the early stage for water aerodromes. Could you explain more detail the reason why you will amend your regulation from the existing one to future in terms of putting the airport certification, water airport certification in the early stage instead of the existing one. That's our second question, and I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Dwi. The next respondent, I'm inviting Mr. Roland, alternate representative Indonesia to IMO. Pak Roland, for 10 minutes, the meeting is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Ravensana. Good evening, Indonesia, and good morning, Canada. Dear moderator and organizer, Mr. Avensena, Pak Wisnu Daryono, the President of CSAS, the presenters, Mr. Lat, Mr. Hebert, and Mr. Armstrong from Transport Canada, thank you for your sharing with us the informations, and also all the ladies and gentlemen. This issue this time is very interesting because we are talking about how to manage the transportations, particularly in our country, Indonesia, that we believe Indonesia have a 70,000 island more. And of course, transportation become the essentials, the main factor for mobility and goods and passengers. And in this case, seaplane operations becomes a necessity, particularly in reaching the areas which surrounded with water territorials. So I believe there are certain areas in Indonesia which dedicated to be operated as water aerodrome in the near future, which means we need to prepare its standards within our regulations very short time. And referring to today's presentations, there is a note from me to highlight, which our presenters from Canada has mentioned in its domestic regulations that related all aviations and also maritime acts. A seaplane is considered to be an aircraft following the rules of Aeronautic Acts, and becoming a vessel is regulated in the Canada Marine Act and Shipping Act. So it is said that seaplanes is considered as an aircraft from the point of takeoff and landing, and become a vessel when maneuvering on the water. So if we look the international arrangements for the aviation's ICAO and maritime IMO, I believe these descriptions meet the definitions agreed between the ICAO and IMO. It is descriptive where the aircraft flying above the 150 meters and outside the influence of ground effect becomes the subjects of the rules and regulations of the ICAO, and while operating below the altitude should be follow the maritime regulatory. As a consequence of these things, of course, we need to prepare regulations related to safety and also other issues such as environment, which will involve at least while operations in the water and in the air. Some notes that are important for me is one is the pilot qualifications in particular need to be prepared to meet the conditions when maneuvering on the water surface, the transitions up to the time flight, and also vice versa. And the second, the aircraft should be equipped with the safety equipment both during air and water maneuvers, such as the use of life jackets for pilots and all passengers. And also water aerodrome infrastructures with its physical characteristics and obstacle considerations, as well as the need for protections of certain areas to secure the area that will be operated as a water aerodrome. Also, the need of navigation devices for the arrangements of a takeoff and landing mode, and also for maneuvering on water surface to anticipate boat and other ships. And of course, we will also have to regulate certain certifications that need to ensure the sustainability of all elements can meet the safety requirements. One thing of my interest or of my question to the presenter is further to know the cooperations between the maritime and aviation's authority on this matter. And also, I believe there are so many other areas need to be discussed further. And I also, within this opportunity, want to share information on my communications with the IMO Secretariat regarding the development of maritime regulations in the operations of seaplane and water aerodromes. It can be said that in this near future, there is a need communications, collaborations between IMO and ICAO, and also involving countries that has already experience in operating of these matters, in particular Canada in this case, to be able to become an input in making international standards. And I believe also my colleague Mr. Aven has already started these discussions for the next ANC meeting in ICAO to discuss these matters to settle up the international standard for this matter. So I realize in the near future, Indonesia really needs to regulate these domestic regulations regarding the operations of the seaplane and water aerodromes. So we need to continue these communications and these cooperations between Indonesia and Transport Canada to be able to exchange information and knowledge to develop the regulation standards in Indonesia. I think that's all I can say. I turn back to you, moderator, Mr. Apensena, and thank you for all.
Thank you, Mr. Roland, for your response. The next, I'm going to invite Pak Budi Sampurno from Indonesia Aerospace. Pak Budi, maximum 10 minutes. The meeting is yours.
Thank you for the time. Good morning, Canada, and good evening, Indonesia. All presentations are very interesting and add to my insight upon the water-based aerodrome and also upon the operation of the amphibious aircraft. Actually, PTDE, Indonesian Aircraft Industry, and LAPAN are currently developing an amphibious aircraft and is still in the preliminary design stage. Pak Dedi, can you share the slide, please?
Pak Budi, please. Pak Budi, are you there? Mana Pak Budi? Pak Budi Sampurno.
Pak Budi Sampurno itu suaranya di mute.
Pak Budi, are you mute, Pak? Okay, probably Pak Budi Sampurno still have technical issues. I'm inviting the next respondents, Pak Geni Luhung from Indonesia Pilot Academy. Pak Kenny, for 10 minutes, the meeting is yours.
Thank you for the time being, Mr. Afen. Before I start, Mr. Afen, radio check. How do you read me?
Okay, loud and clear, Pak.
Loud and clear, thank you. To the Honorable Mr. Afen, to the Honorable Mr. Wisnu, the President of CSAS, to the Honorable Mr. Michael and Michael Hebert, and Mr. Adrian Armstrong. Very nice and interesting presentation and very useful for us. Also for the distinguished guests who has attended this evening. And also there is my cadet. Good evening, my cadet. And good morning in Canada. Please allow me introduce. My name is Geni Lung Prasojo. I'm the director of Civil Pilot Academy in Banyuwangi, especially in Indonesia. Civil Pilot Academy in Banyuwangi has two study programs. There is a fixed wing aircraft pilot, both for non-diploma and diploma 3, and also for diploma 3 aircraft operation, and also as well as non-diploma. So, according to our Minister of Maritime and Infestation Coordinator, Mr. Luhut, that to support the pariwisata, or we call it tourism, Indonesia should have a seaplane. And also Indonesia, this is a fact in the world, that Indonesia is an archipelago country which has more than 17,500 islands in Indonesia. So the seaplane is very important to support, to enhance the tourism aspect, and also for connecting the people to the island into the other island. So Indonesia Civil Pilot Academy has a plan that especially this year, but this year is there's a pandemic, we cannot execute for the seaplane, but for the next year, there should be another study program in Civil Pilot Academy to execute the seaplane program study. So we have 35 Cessna 172 SP Skyhawk already high wings because of the specific purpose for the seaplane is a high wing, if I'm not mistaken. And then also we have two Piper Seneca 5. That's the specification is the low wing, so it's rather difficult to attach the float kit. So we have planned that the next year we will attach one of our aircraft, that is Cessna 172, to use the float kit. So that's why we need the support of all our organizations in this country or outside the country, how to make it happen for the study program. And then I have a question. We have a question for Mr. Michael Ladd. The first question is, you said that the dealing with the seaplane is dealing with the maritime and aviation. It's a little bit tricky sometimes. So it makes me curious that which should make coordination with for the very first time we will operate the seaplane in government side, also the outside the government. That's the first question. And then the second question, which is more suitable for the seaplane for the training? Is it amphibious or non-amphibious? Let's say pure seaplane for the training. That is this question for Michael. And also for Mr. Michael Hebert, I have one question. I have 37 flight instructors who works in Civil Pilot Academy, and also 26 flight engineer works in Civil Pilot Academy. So where is the organization that provide the training near Indonesia? That what is it? You can propose or you can suggest for the training for our flight engineer and flight instructor to prepare the seaplane training. There is the question for Michael Hebert, and then the third question for Mr. Andrian Armstrong. Which one is preferred to be a priority to execute? There is 5 of area of objective. One is install the floating kit and the certification. Second, training is for the human resources. The third is curriculum and syllabus. The fourth is water-based aerodrome, or the fifth is regulation. Because all of the area of expertise of the 5 area that's already mentioned is still in progress. So that is I need the suggestion from the expertise, Mr. Andrew Armstrong. That is, I think that's enough, Mr. Rafael. I'm sorry if there is a mistake. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Kenny.
Yes.
Back again to Pak Budi Sampurno. Pak Budi.
Halo, Pak Alvin.
Yes.
Ya.
Okay, it seems that Pak Trinus Yogo are going to give some comment. Pak Trinus Yogo, please, the meeting is yours, Pak. We still cannot hear you anything, Pak.
Director Standards, Directorate of Aeronautics and Aircraft Operations.
Pak Trinus Yogo, please. Also, seems that we still have some problem with Pak Trinus Yogo. Pak Budi Sampurno, are you coming, Pak, with us?
Same situation, I think. The same situation.
Okay. I think both of you have some questions, and we have also our senior special guest, Bapak Muhammad Ihsan Tatang. He is, I believe, a chairman of Indonesia Airport Expert, something like that. Please, Pak Muhammad Ihsan Tatang, for your response. The meeting is yours, Pak.
Thank you, Mr. Apensena. Good morning. Good morning also for our speaker, Mr. Michael Ladd, Mr. Michael Hebert, and Mr. Andrew Armstrong. First of all, thank you very much for your presentation in sharing session in this webinar. As my colleague already explained, my colleague from Director General of Sea Transport and Mr. Jenny from Banyuwangi already explained that in the coming future, Indonesia will develop again the sea transport, seaplane transport, and water-based because of the condition of the Indonesian geographic needs about this system transportation. So I would like to invite on behalf of Indonesia, of course, if possible, maybe facilitated by Mr. Avensena, to continue coordination and cooperation with this issue, not only in this webinar, but we can learn and share experience in more detail, in more depth, with both Directorate General, Sea Transportation and Air Transportation. So again, we have already the experience of this, but it's a long time ago. Now the PTDI also already preparing the facilities of the seaplane in facilitate this transportation system come through again in Indonesia. So for this, we need some experience, sharing experience from the Transport Canada. I think that's our comment, Pak Avensiana. I believe Transport Canada will positive response to welcome our invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pak Tatang. Thank you for the responses. Seems that we have a lot of questions and response from the participants. So back again to Michael Lett. Hello, Michael Lett. Michael. Okay.
Oh,
so,
Alphen, I'm here.
Yeah. So I'm inviting you. To have feedback from the questions and the response of the participants. Please make it all of the resumes in 10 minutes. So in 10 minutes, the meeting is yours, Michael.
Okay. There were quite a number of questions. So what I couldn't keep up with all of them. So what I would suggest, if a lot of these people have specific questions to me, they can send an email to me on my email. And Afen, can you distribute that, or do I need to mention my email address at this time?
I can distribute it at the end of the sessions. So
okay,
no worries.
I'll leave that to you for the moment. There was one area, and forgive me for pronouncing the name incorrectly because I know I'm going to do it. Nanditya Wadhana, is that correct? But he had several questions on how the water aerodrome operates, namely on the Port of Victoria. You mentioned that there's still interaction between ships and seaplanes. So how do you regulate the communication between the ships to sea, with everybody? And it seems to be very concerning to everybody. But the way Victoria works is you have the air traffic control system, you have the towers, and then in Victoria Harbor itself, they have a flight service station, and it sits right down on the water. And that flight station is also a marine station. So they have communications with the boats and the aircraft, and they have a visual aspect of everything. They also have 2 or 3 small boats that go out and patrol the shipping channels. And these are marked channels, and the only areas for the float planes where they have to share with the larger vessels have the right of way because they have less maneuverability than the float planes. So if, for instance, a tug and a barge were coming in, the seaplane, if it's on the water, would go over to a specific area and just do circles until that ship comes in and docks. If the aircraft is in the air, it stays outside of the area and is in a VFR holding pattern. Now, once those vessels have cleared, then they can go in and land. Now, most of these times, the pilots have these vessels visually, and they can see when that is about to happen. Now, there is no specific control tower in Victoria Harbor itself, so it's not a clearance for landing and that sort of thing. It's the pilot is aware, and the flight service station feeds them the information that they need. It has worked very, very well. The channels for all the shipping are on the marine charts. This is an actual port authority here. So the port authority has the authority to designate the specific areas that everything can happen. and which they have, and which is on that diagram in the presentation that I showed you. And that diagram is in the aviation charts, and it is also in the marine charts, so that everybody is aware of it. When it comes to the marine regulations for the float planes, most of the time it's just the very basic regulations of rights of way, because the float plane is usually landing on the water, and then it's just a very short distance to the dock. So they're just using a very small area of the water. So it's not like they're going down long shipping channels and things of this nature, unless, you know, of course, they have to do a 10-minute or 15-minute taxi down to the far end of the lake because the winds have changed or something of that nature. So hopefully that kind of answers that question. The other one is that kind of stood out for me is the flight planning. Most water aerodromes in Canada have a 4-letter identifier. So if you want to make a flight plan from, you know, point A to point B, and point B is just a float base, and point A is a land-based airport, you file it as you would any other, and then you would, you know, get your clearance, and you'd be let down out of controlled airspace, and you would just go in and make sure you have a clear area to land, and then do your operations. Now with the flight planning, I mean, it's be very similar to the ICAO standards, but you can file a flight plan with a flight service station, and at the end of your flight, you need to close it within, what is it, I believe 1 hour. Or in Canada, we also have a flight itinerary where it's essentially the same thing, but you file it with an authorized person, and you have to close it within, I believe, 24 hours. But I mean, if you're going out into a very remote area where you don't have communications, that sort of thing, what a lot of the pilots do is they take a satellite phone with them so that they can call a flight service station from just about anywhere they are now and be able to open or close a flight plan. So the flight planning portion is still very similar to land operations. So it's not a big change there. The biggest thing with float flying is gaining the experience on the water. It's handling the airplane on the water. It's knowing how to read the winds, looking for protective bays to land and take off in, all of this sort of thing. It's and that kind of thing, you can't just teach it in a school. You have to go out there and do it, and you have to gain the experience. I think Andrew alluded to this earlier, that, you know what, it's only 7 hours to get your pilot's license, but a lot of insurance companies won't let you fly the airplane until you have 50 or 100 hours under your belt, because what they're saying is that 7 hours is a license to learn, but it doesn't qualify you in their eyes. They want you to go out and gain the experience and just learn, you know, what the tides are doing. Is the current stronger than the wind? Is the wind stronger than the current? And a lot of this stuff is just getting in the airplane and getting a feel for it. To share one story with you, when I was flying the Single Otter, and the chief pilot, and you know, at that point I probably had 500, 600, 700 hours, well, probably more than that, probably 1,200 hours or so on float planes. So I was a fairly competent pilot at that point. But I just remember the chief pilot, when I was being checked out on the Single Otter, and he said, in this one particular dock that we go to, he goes, if you come around the corner and you're coming into the dock and you shut everything down, and he says, if you feel a little puff of wind over your left shoulder, he says, you better be out the door, down the stairs, rope in hand, and have that rope around a cleat in under 2 or 3 seconds. Otherwise, this airplane is going to swing around and it's going to take out the 5 airplanes in front of it. And sure enough, a couple weeks later, I was coming in, everything was smooth, everything was going just nicely. And I felt that little puff of wind come over my shoulder. And I was out the door, down the stairs, got the rope around the cleat, and the airplane was 110 degrees away from the dock. And it was starting to go towards these other airplanes. And I got that rope secured just in time. But those are little things that as you learn to fly a float plane, you gain the experience. And unfortunately, float flying is still a lot about experience, being able to read the winds, the waters, the conditions. And we always have a saying with most of the float pilots in Canada to always have an out. And that is whether you're on takeoff or whether you are on landing. And it's basically when I'm taking off, if I have an emergency, where am I going to put this airplane? And you want to have a safe spot picked out in your mind ahead of time. And the same goes for going in and landing to someplace. You want to go in and have a look and go, okay, before I land here, am I going to be able to get out of here? And these are all the little things that you need to start thinking about when you're a float pilot. So unfortunately, I hate to say it, but so much of this just comes down to experience. And in Canada, we've had the luxury of a lot of that experience being handed down from generation to generation of float pilot. So that's sort of, I guess, the one story I wanted to share. There seems to be a lot of concern on the navigation, water navigation, and the air navigation. I think from a general point of view, the float pilots generally give way to the marine traffic, and we just try and always keep to ourselves and see what they're doing and work around it, because now we're playing in their sandbox. So it's, and again, usually, you know, once the airplane is on the water, it's only a short distance to the dock. So the marine regulations, yes, they do apply to the float planes, but it's not like the float plane is sitting on the water all day. He spends most of his time up in the air. So they're not a huge concern. And when you do get into the busier ports and things like that, you have port authorities that usually have designated areas for the float planes to go in and land and take off from. And, you know, certain areas like I showed you in Victoria of routes to and from the docks and that sort of thing. So it almost becomes a non-issue. So I don't know quite what else to say on that. And that's pretty much it for me at this point. I would at this point just like to say thank you very much for having me for the presentation. It's been an honor to work with the Indonesians on an international level and be able to share my experiences with you. I think in time you folks will gain your own experiences and stories and be able to share them as well. So again, thank you. And
thank you, Michael.
I hope I touched on everybody's questions.
Yeah, for sure. Your contact are going to be shared to all of the participants. Okay, the next, I'm going to invite Michael Herbert. Hello, Michael. Okay, okay, Michael, I give you the opportunity to give the feedback, 10 minutes feedback to all of the respondents. Please, for the 10 minutes, the meeting is yours.
Okay, good. So I received and I answered some questions, a lot about waves and operations in rough water. There's no set wave height that for one specific wave height that you can determine whether you could land in or not. This would be based on your aircraft, much like it's a performance thing, it's a skill thing, it's a pilot judgment call. The other question as well that kind of ties into this was, when would you parallel rather than land into the wind? Again, these things, when it starts for operations in conditions like that, it's performance, pilot judgment, and skill as well. You know, when it float flying or seaplane flying, it may be different what one pilot is capable of, their comfort level based on experience or local knowledge, or if you've gone into one area 100 times, you may have the knowledge or the comfort level to you know, find an area where you think you can land where most people wouldn't. If you have 16 passengers on board one day and you're almost at gross weight, and the next day you have 2 people and you know you're 1,700 pounds lighter than you were the day before, all these things factor in to how you'll operate in rough water conditions. And again, going back to the selection, you know, if in Indonesia, when you're going to select these areas, you know, finding protected, using your knowledge of the local weather for where you're going to have a water aerodrome or a base is the ideal location is protected in a bay or on a side where that you're sheltered from wind, so you avoid having waves crashing into your docks or your landing areas or takeoff areas. So right from the start, a lot of planning and before selecting the area, and that will make operating a water aerodrome and from everybody's side much easier. I see somebody has their hand up. Okay. Can you hear me, Athan?
Yes, loud and clear, Michael.
Okay, sorry, I saw someone had their hand up, so I wasn't sure if you could hear me or not. So that for the water conditions, I think it is all in the selection of where you operate, and then everything else, it's factors into skill, you know, experience, and like we mentioned earlier. And as far as the training schools, there's several schools here in Canada that offer training, float flying training. You can, I think they have, there's 50-hour courses. And we'd have to look into that a bit more. The information is on the internet. I'd be happy for you to reach out directly to me, and we could discuss more, exchange some emails on locations or you know, certain programs. But they will offer the all the courses that meet the minimum requirements that Andrew pointed out earlier. And for me, that's it on the questions that I received, and tried to provide feedback. But anytime, email me. Afen can provide you with my contact information. I'm happy to answer any questions or work with you on anything regarding the float operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael Herberts. So before proceeding to the Andrew Armstrong, so we have back again, Captain Trinisyogo. Captain Trinisyogo, ready to check? Seems that Captain Trinisyogo. Seems that we still have any technical issues. Andrew Armstrong, please.
Yes, hello.
Same idea with Michael Latt and Herberts, our two Michael. You have 10 minutes to resume all of the respondents. The meeting is yours.
Perfect, thank you. So I guess the first question there was from the Mr. Ali Shahab, just regarding PIC time for pilots in a commercial flight operation. No, we don't have any regulations for that. Yes, the 7 hours gets the person their seaplane rating, the minimum of 7 hours. However, for operators, we leave it up to the operators to determine what time requirements they want for their pilots. Of course, it would depend on the operation. A big operation with a lot of, twin engine, twin otters might need 1,000 hours of float time before they'd have somebody as a PIC of that. Maybe 500 hours as a co-pilot in an airplane like that. Someone who's only operating maybe caravans might have a lower time, say only 500 hours. And again, we leave that up to the operators. They can determine what's best for their operation and apply it that way. So yeah, we don't regulate a minimum time for that. We leave that to the operators. And the other one was from Mr. Jenny there from the CPL Pilot Academy. Yeah, one of his questions was amphibious or non-amphibious aircraft. I would say for the most part in Canada here for the basic float plane training is a non-amphibious, so just a straight float plane. A lot of the schools here use Cessna 172s. As you know, Cessna 172s are a very common, basic, easy to fly aircraft. I don't think you can get a 172 with amphibious floats, just the weight I think is too much. And even a 172 just on straight floats, usually you're limited to maybe 2 people with half tank fuel. So there may be some weight considerations to look at. But like I said, a lot of flight schools here, when I was out in industry, our flight school, we had a 172 that we used on floats. We did our training on the land side on floats, so it was an easy conversion to go over to the float plane because they'd already been flying that type of airplane, so there's not really a conversion type. If you were to get into amphibious floats, you'd need a more powerful engine, so now you're maybe looking at a Cessna 182 or a 185, and of course all your maintenance requirements go up with that because it's a much bigger engine and more powerful engine, and more you have to be a bit more careful with the engine so that you don't shock cool it or anything like that. And then you had your 5 areas there, and which are the most important? Well, I think regulations is probably the most important because the regulations will allow you to do what you want to do. However, if you're talking with your state and your transportation government there, and you know what regulations are going to be coming down the road, well, now you can start preparing yourself of how you're going to do your program. Probably one of the next most important is the curriculum. What are you going to be teaching your pilots with this float plane rating? And with the curriculum, I would say you want defined lesson plans. Lesson plan 1, we're going to go over to this lake and do this basic takeoffs and landings. Lesson plan 2, we're going over here to do some short field lakes. Over here, we're going to do some confined areas. So you really want to map out and cover as much as you can with the training as to what you're going to do. Next, your instructors who are going to be doing this teaching, you want to make sure that they're properly trained and can give the training to the new pilots that's required. And then the float kit, I think a lot of 172s already have a float kit for them. So as I said, yeah, it's easy to put floats onto a 172. And again, when you're designing your program, you have to think about what you want to do. I don't know in your area or your industry whether you're going to have a lot of amphibious float planes flying. If you are going to have that, well, then maybe you want your basic seaplane course and then an advanced course where you do 5 hours on an amphibian airplane. And again, so that's just all you're planning out, knowing what kind of pilots you're going to need and how you want to train them. And I think those were the main questions that I had. I will say one thing, like for example, here in Canada, I live in Ontario, Northern Ontario, there are thousands and thousands of lakes. There's a lot of tourism companies that take people out there to go fishing in those lakes. So they'll have a main camp somewhere and then they'll fly people, you know, maybe 50 or 100 miles to a remote lake to go fishing. It's all uncontrolled. There's nobody up there controlling anything. So we have a big industry here where you have the float planes basically going off, doing their own thing. They're not under control. As Michael was saying, yes, we have stuff like flight notifications or flight itineraries where the company would keep track of that and say, okay, pilot, you're going to this camp in the morning, then you're going to fly to this other camp to give them some food. You're going to fly to this other camp to pick some passengers up, and then you're flying back. I expect you back by 6 p.m. tonight. And if you're not back by 6 p.m. tonight, I'll notify people that you're overdue, and we'll start sending out search parties or start trying to find out where you are. And that's how a lot of that happens here in Canada. Just, you know, you go do your business for the day, you're expected back at a certain time. If you're not back by that time, well, then we notify the authorities and we start looking. But yeah, a lot of it is all in uncontrolled area with uncontrolled waterdromes, lakes that people don't go into. So you're on your own to make sure that the lake is suitable to do your landing in and where you're going to go. And that's all I have to say, unless there's other questions.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, for this webinar, it's quite long. It's like more than 2.5 hours. And probably these discussions, it doesn't meet all of, doesn't meet the interest to all of the stakeholders. We still need some more discussions. But however, the webinar still need the conclusion. So I'm inviting to the President of CSAS, Pak Wisnu Daryono, to have a conclusion remark for this webinar. Pak Wisnu Daryono, the meeting is yours, Pak. You are still in mute, Pak. Okay.
Thank you, Pak Aven. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Selamat malam Indonesia. Good morning Montreal. Good morning Canada. Distinguished speakers, Mr. Michael Head, Mr. Michael Hebert, Mr. Andrew Armstrong, honorable respondents, CSAS teams, and the webinar participant who we highly respected. The government through the Indonesian Coordinating Minister for Maritime Affairs and Investment, Mr. Luhut Binsar Panjaitan, stated that it would develop water aerodrome and seaplane operation to support Indonesian economic and tourism. Tonight, CSAS Indonesia, in collaboration with Permanent Delegation Office of Republic Indonesia to the ICAO, follow up by inviting experts from Transport Canada, as well as responders who are expert in their field to explain what need and must be prepared to carry out what the government has planned. Then our knowledge and understanding about water aerodrome and seaplane operation are truly enlightened by the presentation and explanation of speakers, as well as responses from respondents. Many people say that in Canada, there are so many water aerodromes operating with hundreds of operators operating some registered seaplane, which, if this could be implemented in Indonesia, would certainly be able to sustain socio-economic progress and social activity through tourism for small island in Indonesia. From a very comprehensive presentation and very enlightening responses, it makes us optimistic that at the technical level, operational of the seaplane and water aerodrome is feasible to run with small problem that are many ways to solve it. Depend on how much patience is there to make it happen. Indonesia is an archipelagic country consisting of thousands of beautiful and charming islands along the Ring of Fire. It's very suitable as a tourist attraction. Of course, it requires seaplane and water aerodrome facility to access this tourism object, in addition to providing evacuation facility in times of emergency. The problem that is often faced in that central government policy are not in line with local government policy, especially when dealing with the interest of the people, the operation of the seaplane, and the development of this water aerodrome will face approval problem from many places, hampering business, causing plans to stop due to impeded coordination. Many situations indicate that the word coordination is easy to pronounce, but sometimes it's difficult to implement. The success of the mission is no longer determined by technical readiness, but the government ability to align policies with various interests, unifying implementation steps from the center policies to implementation in the field. The development of tourism using a seaplane directly to its destination is the right policy that needs full support by all parties concerned. Solid coordination, straightforward regulation, and permits are the keyword for the success of the mission. The operation of the seaplane and water aerodrome in Indonesia urgently needed, given the very high tourism potential of this beautiful archipelago, where technical demands are relatively easy to fulfill, abundant resources throughout the country. So what are we waiting for? Hopefully this good plan will be realized, able to contribute to tourism development and economic growth, which in the end can improve the welfare of the country. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Pak Wisnu Daryono, for the conclusion remarks. So by the conclusion remark stated by Mr. Wisnu Daryono, so it means at the end of this webinar. Again, thank you very much to all of dear participants, to the speakers, Mr. Michael Ladd, Michael Herberts, Duo Michael, and Andrew Armstrong, who make it happen. And also thank you to Barbara Join, Sarah Jardine, and fellow friends from Transport Canada. And again, thank you to all of the respondents for all of the response that given to the speakers. And again, thank you to participants. So for the next webinar, as always, every 2 weeks, we are going to host the webinar. So the next webinar is, as mentioned in this. On how to attract project to flying again. That's for the next 2 weeks webinar. Again, thank you very much to all of the speakers, Michael Hebert, Led, and Andrew. Terima kasih untuk bapak-bapak semuanya. Kita berjumpa lagi pada pertemuan berikutnya. Mohon maaf lahir batin. Sebelumnya kami harapkan bisa panitia untuk bisa menyampaikan contact persons dari kolega-kolega kita di Transport Canada. Sebelum kita tutup, mohon bisa disampaikan.
Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, this is the contact information to all of the speakers and respondents for the tonight's webinar. Hope everybody can save it and we can continue with the further communications. Okay. Okay. Okay, again, thank you to all. Formally, the webinar is closed. Again, thank you and see you for the next webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you for all your help there, Afan. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
everyone.
day.
Yeah. And if you have questions, just reach out to us.
Yes, for sure, Michael.
Okay. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
Salam sehat selalu.
Thank you. Terima kasih.
Salam sehat selalu.
Oke, Pak. Mohon maaf lahir batin.
Pak Lolan, makasih.
Terima kasih Bapak, mohon izin.
Terima kasih Pak Wisnu.
Terima kasih
Pak
Pak,
Ben,
mohon izin.
Pak Dedi.
Ya Pak Geni, Pak Tri, Pak Lolan.
Pak
Ya
Geni,
Bapak.
Pak Dwi,
Pak Dwi.
Salam Bapak.
Mas Alirto.
Pak Budi.
Ya.
Cap, mohon dukungannya Cap. Biar api
Siap.
Banyuwangi jadi
Semangat.
Seaplane nih.
Semangat.
Pak Lolan.
Ya.
Pak Lolan, we plan to make future next webinar itu kita akan going to invite Seaplane Operator and Authority, kemudian NAV Canada ATC-nya dan Commercial Seaplane Operator. Mungkin ini itu lebih ke perhubungan lautnya barangkali ya, Pak Aris. Barangkali ini isu yang mungkin yang penting buat saya sih menghubungkan pada kawan-kawan di Transport Canada bisa share ke sini. Yang jelas webinar ini hanya mempertemukan simpul. Kalau menjawab semua masalah mustahil, Pak.
Ya. Tidak mampu menyambung-nyambungkan saja.
Connecting the dot ya Pak ya.
Ini problemnya ada di ini Pak. Kami itu ada masalah di di COVID. Seandainya nggak ada COVID ini kebetulan realisasi anggaran saya dan Pak Lolan itu masih jelek ini sebetulnya ini. Kami juga mau sekali itu menghadirkan secara fisik Pak beberapa ahli ke Indonesia. It's the problem kan kami sendiri juga nggak bisa kemana-mana ini Pak. Jadi sering itu. Dan Pak Lolan, we are going to invite Pak Lolan and the levelnya lebih tinggi dari kami. Kami mengharap Pak Dubes Pak kebetulan representatif. Kami sedang